All right, Broncos country, it is positional deep dive season here on Broncos Syndicate. So we are just 13 days away from the first open practice of training camp. So I wanted to go through each individual position group for the Denver Broncos, highlight the strengths and weaknesses of each group, who's going to be an impact player out of each group, who's going to start or be a key depth piece for the Broncos, who may be on the roster bubble, so on and so forth. We're just going to go through basically each and every individual player on this roster and evaluate where they stand and what role they could potentially fill on this team in what's going to be somewhat of a rebuilding transitional year, whatever you want to call it, for the Denver Broncos. This, in many ways, is the true year one of Sean Payton because he's not being held back by a quarterback that he inherited that could not run his offense. Sean Payton gets to run his own offense this year, and he gets to implement truly what he wants to do as a coach. So this is going to be a chance to see how Sean Payton wants to build this roster for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And this first season is kind of laying those first bricks of the foundation. We kind of blew things up at the end of last year. We let some of our key pieces of our roster go. And now we're sitting at a point where we got a bit of a youth movement going on in Denver. The way that this positional deep dive is going to work here on Broncos Syndicate is we're going to be ranking from weakest to strongest each individual position group for the Denver Broncos. So today we have our 11th ranked position group for the Broncos, the position group that I've been on the record stating is the weakest position group for the Denver Broncos. You already know what it is by the title. It's the tight end room. I have been long on the record stating that the Denver Broncos need to improve their tight end room, and I just don't feel like what they currently have is a sufficient tight end room in the NFL. It's easily the worst tight end room in the entire league. I literally went and looked at every single other tight end room, and the only ones that I could find were Washington and maybe Carolina that were equally as poor. And in the cases of both of those teams, they both have a clear-cut tight end one. Denver, on the other hand, does not have a clear-cut tight end one, especially when you consider that Greg Dulcich, Lucas Kroll, they may actually fill different roles on this roster than actually true inline tight end. So let's go ahead and get started, Broncos country. And the first player that I wanted to highlight, of course, is going to be Greg Dulcich because he's the player that has the most potential out of everybody in that tight end room. Everybody knows that Greg Dulcich has the physical talent. He's got the tools. It's just been injuries that have really hampered him for his entire career. He first needs to just stay healthy. That's the biggest thing when it comes to Greg Dulcich. If he can stay healthy, then I feel like he can truly carve himself an impact role on this team. But he has this hamstring that has continually bothered him throughout the course of most of his career. It started in 2022. It had him on injured reserve for the final 2 games of the season. Then he re-injured that hamstring in week 1 of 2023. Right before halftime in week 1 against the Las Vegas Raiders, he goes down, tweaks his hammy. He's out for multiple weeks. He returns week 6 against the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday Night Football, plays a handful of snaps in that game, re-injures that hamstring. We don't see him again after that. He returns to practice, I believe it was right before the Detroit Lions game, and he ends up tweaking his foot. He said that it was kind of a bony foot that he had, and his cleats led to significant swelling. He ended up having surgery on that foot early in the offseason, despite Sean Payton saying that he was going to participate in some capacity in either OTAs or mandatory minicamp. That day never came. He never participated at all in off-season activities for the Denver Broncos. Training camp is presumably the first time that we're going to see Greg Dulcich in almost a year. That's not good, man. It's very, very scary to think about Greg Dulcich, just how much of development for him has been lost having been out for all this time. You know, he missed a good chunk of his rookie season and missed basically his entire sophomore season. Now, we're just going to have to be left wondering what the level of development is for Greg Dulcich. Also, health issues aside, Greg Dulcich was not really being utilized as an inline tight end for the Denver Broncos. When he was healthy in training camp last year and in the preseason, most of his snaps actually came as a big slot receiver. He wasn't being utilized tight to the line as a Y or an F tight end, mostly because he really isn't a sufficient blocker. That's been an issue for Greg Dulcich for his entire NFL career. It was a concern coming out of UCLA, mostly because of his somewhat smaller frame and stature as a tight end. He's a good receiving tight end when he's healthy, obviously, but as a blocker, not so much. Sean Payton felt like, okay, maybe I can utilize this really good athlete as a big slot receiver. And when Greg Dulcich ultimately ended up getting hurt, Sean Payton struggled to find somebody who could fill that role. Adam Troutman was already the starting Y tight end for the Denver Broncos heading into week 1 of last year. He earned that role throughout training camp. It was clear and obvious throughout the entirety of camp last year that Adam Troutman was going to be that guy. Now, we're going to talk about him later on in this deep dive because I don't feel like Adam Troutman really lived up to the expectations that we had for him heading into the season. But Greg Dulcich may be thought of more as a big slot. And remember when I said that they struggled to find a replacement for that role after Greg Dulcich went down? Well, that was until Lucas Kroll ended up rising up through the ranks. Now, if you look at Kroll's numbers for 2023, it doesn't really leave anything to write home about. 13 targets, 8 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. But Sean Payton has praised him heavily throughout this offseason process, both in mandatory minicamp as well as in OTAs. So a lot of fans are thinking that Lucas Kroll could be in line for a bigger role in this Broncos offense, and he could be the starting tight end for the Denver Broncos. Well, I want to give you guys some snap numbers here. Snaps by position, what Lucas Kroll ended up playing last year in Denver. He had 76 snaps as an inline tight end. A lot of those snaps came early on when he was first kind of coming into his role in the offense. Then he had 66 snaps as a slot receiver, especially more towards the end of the year when we saw him being featured more and more. That was because they were getting him in favorable matchups in the slot against smaller defenders. He was able to find voids and zone coverage a lot easier because he got a lot more free releases off of the line of scrimmage. And that helped him out a lot more down the line, get featured in this offense. And he also had 24 snaps out wide as a receiver. I really feel like maybe Lucas Kroll is more that insurance policy for Greg Dulcich in terms of being a big slot. That was a role that Kroll really started to come into later on in the season. And I'm curious to see if that's what's going to continue to happen. Kroll was decent as a blocker last year. He wasn't exactly a world beater both in the pass blocking game as well as the run blocking game, but Kroll was at least competent enough to where if the Broncos had to put him in line, he could survive there. I just don't think he would thrive, if that makes any sense. So for Lucas Kroll, I think that fans need to kind of temper his expectations a little bit in terms of being a starting tight end. He might be an impact player as a big slot, particularly if Greg Dulcich either can't stay healthy or he struggles. But again, as a starting tight end, I'm just not sure because he really struggled when he got snaps in line last year. And you have to be able to play in line, obviously, if you're going to be a starting tight end in the NFL. The presumptive starting inline tight end for the Denver Broncos in 2024 is the same guy who it was last year, and that is Adam Troutman. I gotta be honest, Adam Troutman for me is the definition of mid. I'm gonna go ahead and read off some stats here for Troutman. 35 targets, 22 receptions, 204 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 1 drop, so that's decent at least. That was a drop credited by Pro Football Focus. All of these stats are coming from PFF. His PFF pass block grade was 62.1, and his run block grade was 60.1. He allowed 4 pressures. Kind of, again, not something that you really would like to get out of your starting tight end production-wise. I'm looking for more here, quite frankly. And Troutman was clearly and obviously the starting tight end for the Broncos throughout training camp last year, but he really underdelivered in games in the season. I felt that he struggled to separate as a receiver. He was decent enough as a blocker, but again, just the definition of mid all around as a player. He's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. He'll be able to fill that role, but if you really want to get quality production out of your tight end position, then Adam Troutman shouldn't be your guy as a full-time starter. He's a good tight end 2, tight end 3 role player, but as a Batman, not so much. He's a solid Robin, not a great Batman. That's a term we like to use all the time here on Broncos Syndicate. A couple of other guys in the tight end room that kind of round out the depth and are fighting for roster spots here in Denver. First of all, we've got Nate Atkins. Atkins at first was kind of thought of as a hybrid tight end fullback, but when you look at his snap counts, he only got 7 snaps in the backfield last year in 2023. 31 snaps as an inline tight end, 11 in the slot, and 11 out wide, so 60 total snaps on offense. Most of his production came as a special teams player. That's why I feel like he will most likely make the roster, because with the new kickoff rules, you're looking for bigger bodies who can play special teams. That's why I do feel like Nate Atkins has a strong case to make the Denver Broncos roster, but not so much as an offensive player, more so as a special teams player. 4 catches in 2023 on 5 targets, 22 receiving yards, no touchdowns. Not great as a blocker. 51.2 PFF run block grade, 40.7 PFF pass block grade. So, again, those numbers are not very inspiring. I just feel like Nate Atkins is somebody who is on this roster because of the value that he brings on special teams. He'll see a snap on offense here or there. Sean Payton may find a couple of packages where he can utilize him and maybe feature him a little bit more. But again, he wasn't featured pretty much at all offensively last year. It was all special teams for Nate Atkins. Finally, there's a guy who is very intriguing in this tight end room. He's an undrafted free agent and somebody who I think could have a chance to make this team. The Broncos, every single year, seem to have an undrafted free agent that makes the roster. And Thomas Ysman out of Utah is a guy that we should at least keep an eye on as we go throughout training camp. Ysman is 6'5", 251 pounds. He ran a 4.68 40 at his pro day, but he definitely looks a little bit more athletic than that in the limited tape that he has out there that's readily available. He only played in 5 games last year for Utah. He had 12 targets, 8 receptions, 89 yards, and a touchdown. 45.0 run block grade, not great. 74.7 pass block grade. He's somebody who could potentially fight for a practice squad, if not on the active roster, but just the measurables, the build, the athleticism, all that stuff. If he can refine his craft as a blocker, as a route runner, then he has a chance to possibly make this team just because of the sheer lack of depth. We've addressed in some other videos some guys who could be available to kind of bolster this tight end room. That has since kind of dwindled down a little bit. There's not really a whole lot out there on the free agent market that could give the Broncos quality depth. So the Broncos may end up regretting not further addressing this tight end room earlier in the offseason, be it through free agency or be it through the draft. I will maintain my position that this is the worst tight end room in the NFL, and as a whole, one of the worst position groups in the NFL. If you're depending on a player who historically has not been able to stay healthy for the first time in his career, and you're depending on an undrafted free agent to rise up and be your starting tight end when his best production was as a big slot receiver. And same goes for Greg Dulcich. I don't know, man. It's just very concerning to me. And if there's one big glaring weakness position-wise on this roster, it's the tight end room. And that's why, for me, this is the easiest position group to rank. They're the worst position group on the Broncos. And, again, one of the worst position groups in the NFL. They've got to find a way to get better there, or one of these guys is going to have to step up. If not, then the Denver Broncos are going to be in a world of trouble. All right, guys. Be sure to stay tuned for tomorrow as we unveil the number 10 ranked position group for the Denver Broncos. And it's a position group that I feel like, as the season goes on, could certainly rise way higher than 10. But as things stand right now, things are questionable in that room, just to say the least. But give me your thoughts on this analysis of the tight end room. Is there anything that you disagree with? Do you feel like this tight end room has the potential to be better than I'm giving them credit for? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts on this one, as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video, as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. I would really appreciate it, guys. Those are 2 free and easy ways to show your support, helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out, and helps us get seen by more and more members of Broncos country just like you and me. And until next time, guys, I'm your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.